My name is Emma. And the first thing you need to understand is this: I was there the day my brother chose to die. Not because he wanted to. Because he had already died once, carried the weight of a family that consumed him alive, and came back into this world with one single, devastating advantage: he knew exactly how it was all going to end. He knew what our mother was. He knew what I was. He knew what our father's love was worth when it was measured against money and comfort and a wealthy woman's approval. He knew all of it. And he still chose to come back. He still chose to stay. He still chose me. I didn't understand that until I was standing at his grave with a bank card in my hand, a password I hadn't asked for, and a message delivered by a woman I had spent years calling a heartless viper. The card was small. Cream-colored plastic, worn at the edges from being tucked under a hospital pillow for weeks. The password was his birthday. He had left me everything he had. And the note that came with it, 4 sentences, relayed through a woman who was herself weeks from death, told me to leave. Go to an unfamiliar city. Start over. Be someone. That card is sitting on my desk right now as I tell you this story. I framed it. I know how that sounds. But that card is the only receipt I have for a debt that can never actually be repaid. My brother paid it in full. With his lungs. With his years. With 2 lives. And if I ever forget what I was saved from, if I ever start to feel like I built this life through my own cleverness or my own effort alone, I look at that card and I remember exactly who I am and exactly what it cost. Stay with me. Because this story is not just about grief. It is about a family that fed one child to the machinery of its own dysfunction and called it love. And it is about what happens when the person who was fed to the machine comes back with the full memory of everything that was done to them. And does something extraordinary with it. Let me start from the moment that changed everything, the moment I didn't know was the moment. The moment that looked, from the outside, like just another ugly Tuesday in a life full of ugly Tuesdays. My parents were divorcing. I was a child. My mother was drowning in gambling debt, I mean that precisely. Not struggling financially. Not going through a difficult time. I mean debt collectors pounding on the door at 2 in the morning. I mean the smell of cheap cigarettes from men who were not there for conversation. I mean money that existed one day and was gone by the next afternoon because the tables at the back of a certain establishment had called her name again. My father, meanwhile, had found himself a wealthy woman. A quiet woman. A woman whose house had freshly replaced carpet and a south-facing bedroom and the kind of stillness that only money in significant quantities can purchase. And so they made us choose. That is the sentence I want you to hold. They made us choose. A mother and a father, looking at their children, 2 children, a brother and a sister, and presenting the dissolution of a family as a multiple-choice question. As if either option was good. As if choosing correctly was even possible. As if the correct answer wasn't, neither. As if the correct answer wasn't, you are the adults, this is your failure, do not hand it to us and call it a decision. I chose my mother. In my first life, and yes, I said first life, and I will explain, in my first life, I cried and begged and clung to my mother because I could not stand the idea of calling anyone else mom. My brother Mang went with our father. And I watched him go with something like triumph, because I was a child and I thought I had won something. I had not won anything. What I had actually done was sentence myself to years of violence, instability, and a spiral that ended with me taking my own life from depression. And what my brother had done, what he silently, alone, without ever asking for recognition, had done, was spend the entirety of his life working himself into the ground to pay off our mother's debts. Factory floors during the day. Food delivery at night. Coughing blood into a cloth and not stopping. Not stopping until he collapsed in front of her, hospitalized and dying, and only the physical sight of his body breaking, was enough to shock her into changing. He died from late-stage lung cancer. Alone. Exhausted. 18 years old. And somehow, we both came back. I know what that sounds like. I know. I am not asking you to believe in mechanics you cannot explain. I am asking you to understand the emotional truth of what I mean when I say, we came back with the memory of what happened the first time. My brother came back knowing he had three things: lung cancer already growing in his chest, a family that had already proven exactly what it was capable of, and the second chance to make one different choice. Just one. He chose to go with our father instead of our mother. He chose to give me his spot. Not because he wanted the comfortable life, but because he had watched me die in the first one, and he would not allow it again. He gave me the suffering. Deliberately. Knowingly. As an act of love so precise and so devastating that I spent years hating him for it before I understood what he had actually done. Let me tell you what that suffering looked like in the second life, the life I was now living in my mother's house. The total inventory of what that life contained: 30,000 yuan borrowed from our father, gambled away within weeks. The family home, the only asset we had, sold to cover losses, net zero recovery because the tables had already taken the equity. 2 people living in a basement that smelled like damp concrete and old mistakes. A mother who had decided, somewhere along the way, that my body was an acceptable variable in her financial calculations. Our house in the first life had been demolished and she had received compensation that made her wealthy enough to take care of me. None of that happened this time. Without my brother working himself to death, without the shock of watching him collapse, she never stopped. She went deeper. She took everything. She took me with her. I have thought about that number many times. What it would have taken to stabilize her in the second life. What combination of interventions, debt consolidation, therapy, genuine accountability might have changed the outcome? The answer, I believe, is nothing that she was willing to accept. Some losses cannot be arrested from outside. She would have needed to want to stop. She did not want to stop. She only wanted someone to keep paying. That someone, in the first life, had been my brother. In the second life, it was me. Now, here is where I need to tell you about the other person in this story. The stepmother. Jo Haim. The woman I had spent years, plural, calling a heartless viper. The woman I blamed, in my first life, for my brother's suffering at our father's house. The cold woman. The controlling woman. The one who insisted on quiet and order and who expressed her preferences through silence and small cruelties of the domestic kind. You may not bring your phone to the table, you may not drag your feet when you walk, the carpet has just been replaced, wipe your shoes. I had constructed this woman into a villain because it was easier than understanding her. I had needed someone to blame for what happened to my brother in that house. And she was there, and she was cold, and she was easy. She was also dying. Late-stage cancer. Chemotherapy, alone. The smell of hospital disinfectant she tried to cover with perfume and failed. Painkillers hidden in a vitamin bottle, the exact same hiding place my brother used. 2 people in the same house, both dying, both hiding it, both performing health for the benefit of a man who preferred comfortable illusions to difficult truths. My brother noticed. He recognized it because he recognized himself in it. And quietly, without announcement, he became her companion in the specific loneliness that only terminal illness inside a maintained domestic performance can create. They played chess. They sat in the garden. They spoke about dying without calling it dying. My brother told her he didn't want to come back in the next life. She told him she understood. Neither of them was performing, for once. Neither of them needed to. That is the relationship I had written out of my accounting of our family. That is the alliance I had dismissed as irrelevant because it didn't fit the story I was telling myself about victimhood and blame and who owed who what. My brother found more genuine human contact in the last months of his life with a woman I called a viper than he ever found with me, his actual sister, who was too busy demanding what she thought she deserved to notice what she had already been given. People think revenge begins with anger. Mine began with understanding. And understanding, for me, began with a bank card delivered at a graveside by a dying woman who had no reason to honor a dead boy's last wish except that she had promised him she would. And she was not the kind of woman who broke her promises. Here is what my brother knew when he made his choice at the beginning of the second life. He knew I would probably spend years being angry at him. He knew I would blame him. He knew that watching me go with our mother, watching me choose the suffering, would feel, to me, like abandonment. He knew all of that. He knew it because he had watched me, in the first life, slowly collapse under the weight of that same conviction, that I had been abandoned, that I deserved better, that someone owed me the happiness that had been taken. He had watched that conviction destroy me. And he came back and let me feel it again, on purpose, because he understood something that I had not yet learned. Some lessons cannot be taught. They can only be lived. And then, at the exact right moment, he handed me the door. Now let me tell you what happened to our mother. Because this is the part where the machine starts to fail. And I want you to understand each failure, in order, because the order matters. The first crack came on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after my brother's funeral. The money, the 100,000 yuan that Joe Haim had given her at the funeral, the money she had extracted by threatening to disturb my brother's send-off, the money she had taken without even burning incense for the son she had supposedly come to mourn, that money hit the tables by Thursday. Gone. Every cent. The expression on her face when she walked into a casino with 100,000 yuan and walked out with nothing was something I did not witness personally. But I heard about it. Because she called me. She called at 11:17 at night. I didn't answer. She called again at 11:43. I didn't answer. The third call came the following morning. I picked it up. She said she needed me. Just a little. Just to get back on her feet. Just this once, and then she would stop, she promised. She was my mother. She had given birth to me. Did that mean nothing? I said one sentence. I said, brother asked me to go somewhere else. I'm going. Then I hung up. The second failure came about a week later. The basement landlord, a man who had been patient for 3 months because he was soft-hearted and because my mother had convinced him her situation was temporary, sent an eviction notice. She had not paid rent. She had not paid utilities. She had no plan to pay either. He gave her 2 weeks. She did not find another place in 2 weeks. The third failure, she attempted to steal from a neighbor. Got caught. Got beaten. Broke her leg in the process of being removed from the premises. Ended up in a hospital bed she could not pay for, with a daughter she had driven away, and a son who was ash in a jar on a sunny hillside somewhere because his father had kept his promise and found him a spot where he would get sun every day. The fourth failure, she contacted our father. Our father, who had been sitting in grief so deep it was changing the architecture of his face, who was forgetting things now, the doctor said, brain trauma from loss, which I privately thought was the body's kindness protecting him from the full accounting of what he had participated in, our father, who had gone soft with guilt in a way that was too late to mean anything but still had to go somewhere. She asked him for money. He said he didn't have it. She said he was lying. He said, "She's gone. I have nothing left that's mine." And he hung up. I know because he told me later, in one of our few conversations, that she had called 14 times that week. He answered twice. Both times he said the same thing. Nothing. The fifth failure was the arrest. She had gone to the neighborhood where Joe Haim's family maintained a property. She had, apparently, decided that the woman who had given her money once would give her money again. She was wrong about many things in her life, but this was the most expensive miscalculation she ever made. Joe Haim, or rather, Joe Haim's estate, because by then she was gone, she had died quietly, in a garden, in the presence of my father who had loved her more than he ever admitted. Joe Haim's estate had prepared a report. The extortion at the funeral, documented. The pattern of demands, documented. The threat made over my brother's body while he was not yet cold, documented. The officers arrived at 2:30 in the afternoon. They used her name. They said she was suspected of extortion. She said there must be a mistake. She said she hadn't broken any laws. She said she didn't know what they were talking about. She went with them anyway. I was in a new city when I heard. I was in a small apartment with clean walls and no debt collectors and a window that faced south. There were flowers on the windowsill because I had bought them myself with money I had earned myself. And when I got the call, when someone told me what had happened, I sat down on the floor beside the window and I held my brother's bank card in both hands and I did not feel triumph. I did not feel vindication. I felt something much quieter than either of those things. I felt the particular piece of a machine that has finally, at long last, run out of things to consume. Here is the family system sentence. The one that explains everything. Every family has a person it assigns to be the bottom of the structure, the one who absorbs the instability, the debt, the consequences, the violence, the grief that no one else wants to carry. As long as that person stays in their position, the family functions. Not well. Not justly. But it functions. The moment that person leaves, the moment they stop absorbing, the poison has nowhere to go. It spreads upward. It touches everyone. You can call it revenge if you want. But it is not revenge. It is just physics. Remove the floor, and everything falls. My brother removed himself. In the only way available to him. Now let me tell you about my father. Because he was not purely villain, and I will not pretend otherwise. He was a weak man who made a coward's choice at the moment of divorce and never fully reckoned with the cost of it until the bill arrived in the form of an 18-year-old boy in a hospital bed who couldn't see and was still protecting him from information that would hurt him. My father bathed my brother. Fed him. Sat with him and chanted sutras that neither of them believed in because he needed somewhere to put the helplessness. He slapped himself in his room at night when he thought no one could hear. He lost weight. He started forgetting things. He told me, the one time we truly talked, that the worst moment of his life was not my brother's death. It was the moment he realized how many times my brother had protected him from the truth, and what that protection had cost. He said, I thought he was quiet because he was fine. He was quiet because he was carrying everything so I wouldn't have to. He was crying when he said it. I let him cry. I did not comfort him, and I did not punish him. I just listened. That is the only grace I had available. A limited thing. An incomplete thing. but real. He visits my brother's grave every week. He talks to him. He says he's worried he'll forget things, the doctor, the brain trauma, and he goes more often now because he's scared that one day he'll wake up and not remember what my brother looked like. So he goes and he sits and he reminds himself. I think that is its own kind of sentence. Not one I would have chosen for him, but one that fits the shape of what he did. I went back once. One time. I stood at the grave with the framed bank card I had brought as a kind of offering, which is not a rational thing to do, and I did it anyway, and I talked to my brother for about 20 minutes. I told him about the apartment. The south-facing window. The flowers. The job I had gotten, which was modest and mine and unborrowed. I told him I was learning to cook because the alternative was spending money on restaurants, and I was still, apparently, constitutionally incapable of wasting money even when I had enough of it. I told him I had bought a warm hat. Not because my hair was falling out, like his had. Just because it was winter and I was cold and I could afford to keep myself warm. I told him that seemed important to mention. I told him I was learning not to be ashamed of wanting to be comfortable. That is harder than it sounds, when every lesson you absorbed in childhood was that comfort was something other people had and wanting it was a form of greed. I told him I was still angry sometimes. Not at him. At the shape of things. At the fact that he came back knowing he was dying and did it anyway and didn't even get to keep the second life long enough to see what he changed. At the fact that the change was real, the machine failed, I escaped, our sister eventually made it to a new city with what he left her. The woman who had been called a viper left the world gently in a garden instead of alone. Our father is broken but present and remembering, for now, and he doesn't get to see any of it. I told him that seemed like the most unfair part of the entire accounting. Then I laughed. Because he would have said, if he could have said anything, that he had seen enough. That he was tired. That he was not coming back again, not for any reason, and he hoped I wasn't either. He would have said that in a completely flat voice, without self-pity, just as a statement of preference. I know exactly how it would have sounded. I can still hear it. I framed the bank card when I got home. It is on the desk to my left as I tell you this. Cream-colored plastic, worn at the edges. Password, his birthday. The entire structure of what I was allowed to become, compressed into a small rectangle that fits in the palm of one hand. People ask me sometimes if I regret anything. If I wish I had chosen differently at the beginning, chosen my father instead of my mother, kept my brother from having to sacrifice himself. And I understand why they ask that. But the question assumes I had information I didn't have. The question assumes that what my brother did was a mistake. It was not a mistake. It was a choice. Deliberate, eyes open, made with full knowledge of the cost. He chose to pay what he had already paid once before, because this time the payment bought something different. This time it bought me a future instead of a grave. My brother's greatest understanding was not that he was going to die. He already knew that. His greatest understanding was that the life of someone who loves you is worth more than your own comfort, and he acted on it, fully, without asking for acknowledgement or gratitude or even the small mercy of being understood before he was gone. That is the standard he set. That is the inheritance he left. I try to be worth it. On the days when that feels like too much, and there are those days, I will not pretend otherwise, I look at the card. I remember the password. I remember that someone who was already dying chose to remember my birthday anyway. And then I go do the next thing that needs to be done. Because the best revenge against a life that tried to consume me is not destruction. It is construction. It is the unspectacular, daily, necessary work of building something that did not exist before and would not exist if I had not survived to build it. My brother did not come back to teach me to hate. He came back to show me the door. The door was always going to cost him everything. He knew that. He walked through it first anyway, so I would know it could be done. Some debts cannot be repaid. They can only be honored. I am still learning what that means, and I suspect I will be learning it for the rest of a life that I did not earn and was not owed and received anyway, from the hands of an 18-year-old boy who asked for nothing in return except that I go somewhere unfamiliar and begin. He gave me the world. The least I could do was live in it,